Today we celebrate feminine beauty in this theme and era, expressed through style, elegance, posture, and presence. In the 1960s, the skies became a stage for elegance, and women were at the heart of that performance. The uniform of the flight attendant was more than clothing. It was a symbol of professionalism, charm, and aspiration. Feminine beauty was not only acknowledged, but highlighted in ways that carried grace, warmth, and assurance. This is the story of how women at 30,000 feet defined glamour for an entire decade. What made the flight attendants of the 1960s unforgettable was not simply their role in guiding passengers or serving meals. It was the way they embodied a cultural ideal of elegance in motion. A woman stepping down the jetway in her uniform brought a quiet sense of wonder to travelers, symbolizing both the promise of the jet age and the grace of feminine presence. With each detail, the cut of the skirt, the tilt of a hat, the confidence tried. These women gave form to the glamour of travel itself. The decade of the 1960s was a turning point in aviation. Commercial air travel had become more accessible, and airlines competed not only with service, but also with the image of refinement. At the center of this new image were women, chosen and trained to carry both safety and elegance in their posture. Passengers entering a Boeing 707 in 1964 might recall the polished poise of an attendant, whose presence reassured them before the engines roared to life. Women in these roles were never background. They were the visible face of an industry reaching for the future. Feminine beauty became a kind of guarantee. Poised smiles and graceful movements suggested that the journey would be safe, dignified, and memorable. The style of the 60s began to shift dramatically from the conservative lines of the previous decade. For women in the air, uniforms became carefully designed statements. Hemlines gradually rose above the knee, reflecting broader fashion trends. Yet the overall look always retained dignity. Airlines like Pan American, and Eastern invested in distinctive uniforms created by designers who understood that elegance was essential to brand identity. Emilio Pucci, for example, famously introduced bold colors and geometric prints for Braniff International Airways in 1965. Women wearing those uniforms became symbols of modern art as much as professional crew. In every design choice, feminine beauty was showcased as part of a larger story of progress. The silhouette emphasized clean lines, tailored jackets that defined the shoulders, skirts cut to allow movement yet maintain modesty, and blouses that softened the look with flowing collars or scarves. Accessories were not optional, they were integral to the uniform. A pillbox hat, a small scarf knotted at the neck, white gloves tucked neatly at the wrist, each detail added to the aura of poise. The colors spoke of the sky itself: navy blue for depth, sky blue for freshness, crisp white for clarity. These were not random choices. They were part of a visual vocabulary that said, "Trust us. You are in capable hands." And at the center of that message was feminine elegance. By 1962, United Airlines had introduced uniforms that combined traditional tailoring with modern accents. Women in navy suits with gold buttons moved gracefully through airports, their posture upright, their expressions confident. The fabrics chosen were both durable and refined, wool blends that held their shape, resisting the fatigue of long hours aloft. Even the seams and hemlines were crafted to resist wear, so that attendants always appeared immaculate. Beauty in this context was never fragile. It was resilient, professional, and visible to every passenger who boarded. The palette expanded as the decade advanced. By 1968, colors grew more vibrant, reflecting the optimism of the jet age. Bright oranges, emerald greens, and sunshine yellows appeared, often paired with coordinating hats and handbags. These looks were playful yet still formal, demonstrating how women carried the ability to embody change while maintaining timeless charm. The evolution of uniforms captured a balance. Femininity was celebrated without compromising authority. Passengers trusted attendants not only because of their training, but because their elegance projected calm and order even in turbulence. One curiosity that travelers of the era often recalled was the ritual of boarding itself. As passengers entered the cabin, they were greeted by attendants whose uniforms were not merely clothing, but carefully designed impressions. Women held clipboards or offered assistance with a gracious smile, and their posture suggested both approachability and discipline. In many ways, these first moments defined the entire journey. Feminine beauty was the first reassurance that a voyage into the skies could be glamorous as well as safe. Another detail often overlooked was footwear. Airlines insisted on shoes that combined form and function. Modest heels that elongated the silhouette, but were stable enough to move quickly in emergencies. Polished leather in matching colors reinforced the totality of the look. Stockings were expected to be seamless and neat, maintaining a continuous line that reflected the discipline of the uniform. These details mattered because they expressed consistency. Women's beauty was framed not by extravagance but by precision, the impression that nothing was left undone. By the mid-1960s, designers began experimenting with futuristic motifs. Braniff's Airstrip campaign, launched in 1965, featured bold mini dresses, helmets, and even space-inspired accessories. Though controversial at times, the intention was clear: to align aviation with the era's fascination for space exploration. Women became the carriers of that vision, their uniforms turning each flight into a performance of modernity. Feminine elegance did not resist change, it adapted, proving versatile enough to embody both tradition and innovation at 30,000 feet. Passengers often remarked on the sparkle of small details: a golden pin shaped like an airline's logo, a scarf fluttering slightly as an attendant moved down the aisle, or the rhythmic click of heels on the cabin floor. These impressions lingered not because they were extravagant but because they were deliberate. Every element of the uniform was designed to highlight beauty in service of assurance. Women in these roles became symbols of an entire cultural mood: optimistic, stylish, and confident in the promise of the future. And so, the look of the 1960s flight attendant was never just a uniform. It was a carefully orchestrated ensemble where fabrics, colors, and accessories carried meaning. Women transformed functional clothing into symbols of glamour, professionalism, and presence. As the decade progressed, the evolution of style continued, adding new elements that deepened the story of feminine elegance in the skies. The look was not yet complete, and its unfolding would carry us further into the cultural rituals that gave flight its glamour. Once again, we are in the 1960s. And once again, we celebrate feminine beauty as it was expressed through the style and presence of flight attendants soaring above the world. The look that defined the 60s was not finished with tailored jackets, neat skirts, and polished shoes alone. Accessories continued to refine the image. Many airlines provided small handbags that matched the uniform's color scheme, allowing attendants to carry manuals and personal essentials while maintaining visual unity. Jewelry was minimal, often limited to a simple watch or a modest pair of earrings. This restraint underscored the message that beauty lay in discipline and harmony, not exagération. Hair was equally important. Carefully styled into bobs, bouffants, or sleek buns that held shape even during long-haul flights. These hairstyles mirrored the elegance of the time, echoing the fashionable choices women made in the cities below while adapting to the practical needs of life in the air. Scarves became iconic during this period. A brightly patterned scarf, tied neatly at the neck or draped across a shoulder, softened the strict lines of the uniform and introduced a personnel touch. Designers knew that the scarf could suggest motion, catching light as women moved gracefully through the cabin. These small details made the look complete, ensuring that the uniform was never static, but alive with the presence of the women who wore it. By the late 1960s, these accessories had become as recognizable as the aircraft themselves, symbols of a time when glamour and travel were inseparable. If clothing defined the surface of style, culture revealed its depth. The daily routines of flight attendants in the 60s reflected the larger world in which women moved. Training schools were rigorous, teaching not only safety procedures, but also etiquette, posture, and even diction. Airlines believed that passengers would feel more at ease if attendants spoke with calm precision and carried themselves with elegance. This was not accidental. It was a deliberate investment in feminine presence as a form of hospitality. Women were expected to combine professional skill with an appearance of warmth that made every traveler feel welcome. Within the cabin, rituals unfolded like choreography. A safety demonstration was delivered with graceful gestures, transforming a technical routine into an elegant performance. Serving meals on trays required balance and poise, especially when turbulence made the aisle difficult to navigate. Passengers often remembered the steady hands and reassuring smiles of attendants who made service look effortless. In these moments, beauty was expressed not through appearance alone, but through movement. Every step, every gesture, every word carried the rhythm of assurance. The settings that surrounded these women further amplified their role. Airports in the 1960s were gateways to the future, filled with glass walls, sleek furniture, and the optimism of modern design. Attendants, moving through these spaces in tailored uniforms, seemed to belong to this world of progress. Travelers might recall the sight of women walking in formation toward a waiting jet, their presence creating an almost cinematic scene. In popular imagination, they became icons of the decade, appearing on magazine covers, advertisements, and even postcards. Time magazine in 1966 described flight attendants as the front line of the jet age, acknowledging that their elegance was inseparable from the appeal of modern air travel. Leisure and work intertwined in their lives. During layovers in cities like Paris, Rome, or Tokyo, attendants became unofficial ambassadors of style. Photographs of women in uniform strolling along foreign boulevards reinforced the association between travel and glamour. These moments were not only personal memories, but part of a collective story. An image of American femininity that traveled across borders. The uniform, worn with grace, became a passport of its own, instantly recognizable anywhere in the world. Passengers often carried sensory memories of the experience. The sound of polished heels on an aircraft's floor, the subtle fragrance of cologne chosen to complement the uniform, or the sight of a smile offered with genuine warmth. These impressions lingered long after the flight ended, reinforcing the idea that travel was not only about reaching a destination, but about experiencing a moment of elegance along the way. For many, the glamour of the skies became a cherished memory precisely because women carried it with such poise. The 1960s were also a time of social change, and flight attendants stood at the intersection of tradition and transformation. On one hand, they embodied discipline and order. On the other, they represented independence, moving freely across borders at a time when many women's lives were still bound by narrower roles. The uniform became a paradox. It suggested conformity, yet those who wore it were among the few women of the era who experienced global mobility as part of their profession. Feminine beauty in this context was both a public image and a personal statement, bridging the familiar and the extraordinary. By the late 1960s, as fashion across society embraced brighter colors and bolder designs, airlines reflected this change. Passengers boarding a flight in 1969 might be greeted by attendants in uniforms designed by high-profile fashion houses. Their colors vivid, their cuts daring, yet always worn with the same composure. Women carried these new looks with confidence, reminding the world that beauty evolves, but its essence, elegance, posture, presence, remains constant. All of this prepared the stage for impact. The look of the 60s was more than a uniform, more than a style. It became a cultural marker. Women's presence in the cabin influenced magazines, advertising campaigns, even television shows. The way they smiled, the way they walked, the way they dressed, all of it radiated outward into society. It was not confined to the cabin at 30,000 feet. It became part of the cultural air itself. The story of 60s flight attendants was, at its heart, a story of how feminine beauty carried weight far beyond appearance. It influenced the way people imagined travel, the way they associated service with grace, and the way they connected glamour with the future. This impact was not temporary, it extended into the decades that followed, shaping expectations and memories. As the look closed its chapter, it left behind an enduring impression that would ripple across fashion and culture for years to come. And it is into that legacy, and the resonance of this feminine style beyond the skies, that we now turn. Once more we are in the 1960s, and once more we celebrate feminine beauty, as it was carried in the style and presence of flight attendants high above the clouds. The impact of their look reached far beyond the cabin walls. Women who served as attendants became cultural icons. Their image reproduced in magazines, travel posters, and television commercials. When a young woman appeared in uniform on the pages of a Sunday supplement in 1967, she was not only representing an airline, she was representing a vision of modern femininity. The cut of her jacket, the gleam of her scarf, and the confidence in her smile were signals that travel was no longer a privilege for the few but a glamorous adventure shared by many. Feminine elegance became synonymous with the very idea of jet age progress. Airline advertising of the era leaned heavily on this association. Campaigns often highlighted the presence of women as symbols of refinement. A Pan-American poster might depict an attendant walking across a tarmac with a globe in the background, suggesting that the world was within reach. Television commercials featured their poised greetings, their careful service, and their confident postures. Even when the message was about routes, fares, or technology, the visual focus remained on women. Because their beauty carried reassurance that travel was approachable and stylish, passengers took these impressions home. A traveler in 1964 might return from a journey not only with stories of distant cities, but also with a vivid memory of the women who made the trip graceful. They might describe the navy uniform with gold accents, the crisp scarf at the collar, or the polished shoes stepping steadily down the aisle. In recounting their trip, they would often mention the charm and elegance of the attendants before recalling the meals or the destinations. The feminine presence had become a touchstone of the travel experience itself. The influence extended beyond aviation. Fashion designers, noting the popularity of flight attendant style, adapted similar silhouettes for ready-to-wear collections, skirt suits with tailored jackets, neat scarves, and pillbox hats appeared on department store racks in 1966 and 1967. Young women who had never set foot on an aircraft could purchase outfits inspired by the uniform, embracing a version of that elegance in their everyday lives. This was a rare example of professional attire shaping mainstream fashion, proof of how powerfully feminine beauty in uniform resonated across society. Television and film also captured the allure. Dramas and comedies alike used the image of flight attendants to evoke sophistication and modernity. The very sight of women in those uniforms was enough to set a scene as cosmopolitan. The impact of their presence was so strong that it shaped cultural expectations. To speak of air travel in the 1960s was to speak of feminine elegance moving gracefully down the aisle of a jet. And so, the legacy of this look rests on three feminine signatures. First, the silhouette, clean lines, tailored jackets, modest yet modern skirts, and carefully chosen accessories that together projected authority and grace. Second, the color palette. Navy blues, sky blues, bright oranges, and emerald greens, each chosen to echo the optimism of the skies while complementing the women who wore them. Third, the presence itself, the posture, the stride, the poised gestures, and the calm smile that transformed functional service into a performance of elegance. These three elements, silhouette, color, and presence, remain etched in memory as the hallmarks of 60s flight attendant style. The beauty of this era's flight attendants was not about extravagance. It was about discipline, harmony, and dignity woven into the details of fabric, color, and movement. Feminine elegance became a kind of language spoken across borders, understood in every airport lounge and cabin, remembered long after the journey ended. Even today, when air travel is faster and more practical, the memory of the 60s lingers as a golden age of glamour. And at the center of that glamour were women whose beauty was defined by their professionalism, their posture, and their presence. The story closes with an enduring truth: feminine beauty, when expressed through style and grace, has the power to shape culture, memory, and aspiration. The 60s flight attendant was more than an employee of an airline. She was a symbol of possibility. She represented the dream of reaching faraway places with elegance intact. Her uniform was more than clothing. It was a promise that travel could be both safe and beautiful. As we look back, we see not only fabrics and colors, but the women themselves. Women who carried the glamour of the skies with every step they took at 30,000 feet. Their elegance continues to inspire, reminding us that beauty is not only seen but felt in the way it reassures, welcomes, and uplifts. And so, as this episode ends, the invitation remains open to join us again in exploring another moment in history where feminine beauty, expressed through style, elegance, posture, and presence, told a story that still shines today.